Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a bit different. We've got this pile of research notes, originally put together for a creative project, actually, and we thought let's run a kind of cultural comparison experiment with them. We're going to focus on two really distinct regional identities on the Korean Peninsula. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The mission here is to look at North Korea's South Pyongan province, and, well, really contrast it directly with South Korea's Chungcheong region. We want to get beyond the usual political stuff and dig into their cultural DNA, trace how history, geography, how it all shapes their particular rhythm. We're really trying to track the cultural forces that make one place all about gritty production and the other, well, more about quiet patience.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating comparison because you've got these two provinces that, they're separated by ideology, a heavily militarized border, everything. But despite all that, both of them serve as these foundational economic and cultural anchors for their countries. South Gyeonggi is, well, it's the industrial engine for the North, no question, while Chungcheong is often seen as the geographical, maybe even historical anchor of the South. So what we're trying to understand is the why behind these really divergent identities. Where does it come from?
Okay, let's start up north then, in South Pyongan, the industrial heart.
Yeah.
When you look at the notes for this region, what's the one thing that just jumps out?
Production, labor, it's all defined by that. The notes really hammer home Pyongyang's role as the industrial heartland of North Korea. It's absolutely critical for the raw materials that fuel Pyongyang, the capital. We're talking huge amounts of coal, iron reserves, and then the manufacturing that turns those resources into actual goods. Life there is really structured around the factory, the mine shaft. That's the rhythm.
And this isn't just a recent thing, right? This industrial identity is like baked into its history. Was it a big deal during the Korean War too?
Oh, absolutely. It was a major strategic focus during the war, precisely because it already had those industrial plants, those huge mining facilities. You can't really control the country without controlling the source of its material strength, right? And that constant historical pressure, that need, it reinforces this identity. The people there are seen as and see themselves as essential, hardworking contributors. But here's something fascinating. There's this ideological layer put on top of all that heavy industry. Our sources point out that Pyeongseong City, right there in the province, was specifically chosen back in the 60s and 70s, designated a science city, the idea being to centralize high-level research and education there.
So even the, quote, coal miners of the nation are being told they also have to be on the cutting edge of science. It's quite a specific mandate, isn't it? Tying this future-focused science goal to the immediate, pretty grueling industrial reality. Okay, now let's shift gears. Let's travel south, across the peninsula, to Chungcheong. So Pyongyang is defined by the coal mine and the factory floor. How does Chungcheong define itself? What's its physical and historical anchor?
Chungcheong is really seen as the historical heartland of Korea. Partly just geography, it's central. But where Pyongyang emphasizes, immediate production, Chungcheong seems to emphasize continuity. Pace. It's known for a slower, more relaxed lifestyle. People are seen as patient, modest, and this isn't just like a vague stereotype. It feels rooted in its history as a long-term administrative center. The history there goes incredibly deep. This region had Gongju and Guyo. They were capitals of the ancient Baekje kingdom, and not just for a little while, for nearly 7 centuries, right up until 660 CE. Today, those places are UNESCO heritage sites. So imagine living somewhere where the cultural anchor hasn't really shifted since the 7th century. What does that do to your sense of time? It grounds you, I think. It probably promotes patience over, constant urgency.
That makes a lot of sense. The focus shifts maybe from just raw output to legacy, longevity.
Right. Precisely. And you see that balance today. Chungcheong is still a vital agricultural region. Rice, obviously, but also that famous Korean ginseng. But, and this is the interesting parallel with Pyongyang, it also hosts a massive modern science center, Daejeon. Daejeon is a huge science and tech hub. It's home to Daejeon Innopolis, which is basically South Korea's main research complex.
Wow. Okay, so we have two different countries, two really opposing cultural tempos. He's at grit versus patience. But both regions, North and South, they both seem to anchor their identity and maybe their future strategy around this idea of a science city. That shared focus on R&D, that's an incredible parallel. We should definitely keep that in mind as we dig deeper. All right, let's move on to personality. It sounds like the economy and history have really set the pace for these communities. What about the cultural stereotypes? What do people maybe think of each other, or how do they see themselves internally?
Well, the regional stereotypes are pretty fascinating because they seem like such a direct result of that economic base. People from South Pyongyang are like universally described as hardworking, very practical, intensely industrious. They're seen as the engine of the nation, right? Focused on getting things done. Efficiency matters. A lot.
And the flip side, that patient, maybe more gentle Chungcheong identity.
Yeah, they're generally seen as calm, very good-natured, maybe excellent diplomats, the perfect negotiators because they're supposedly never rushed. They get admired for their warmth, definitely. But the stereotype that often sticks, especially the negative side, is that they're sometimes teased for being too slow or, taking their sweet time when maybe things need to happen faster.
This whole contrast in pace, it must show up most clearly in how they actually speak. Right. Let's get into the dialects. How does that need for efficiency, or maybe that appreciation for patience, affect things like syllable count or intonation?
Oh, it's maybe clearest there. The Pyongan dialect. It's almost like a linguistic shortcut, designed for action. It's got this clipped, strong intonation. It tends to cut out syllables, cut out sounds wherever possible, just for efficiency. So where, say, the standard Seoul dialect might use 3 syllables, Pyongan might just use 1 or 2. Okay, here's an example. The sort of formal, standard way to say it could be shomalyera. The Pyongan dialect often clips that right down to ooh, yumira, see? It drops the vowel in the middle, locks off the last syllable. It's quick, decisive, minimizes wasted breath. Pretty perfect if you're shouting across a noisy factory floor or down a mine shaft, maybe.
Wow, so the language itself is almost engineered for output maximization. That's grit built right into the phonetics. That's something.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with the Chungcheong dialect. It typically features a slower, more drawn-out intonation. Instead of clipping things short, they tend to elongate the final syllables, especially using these unique regional endings like su or yu. These endings convey a really relaxed, friendly tone. They just take the urgency right out.
So instead of that clips command, you get something like, you mentioned jorsu, meaning that's what happened. That little su ending, it sounds so warm, almost like a verbal nod or something.
It really does. It functions almost as a regional marker of respect and gentleness. It sort of suggests, hey, we're in no hurry here. Sit down, let's talk about this.
No.
And this difference, it's perfectly mirrored in their public messaging, too. South Pyongan uses these production-focused, really demanding state slogans, stuff like, let us be the vanguard of science and industry. It's a collective call to action, very direct.
Right, whereas Chungcheong's slogans sound more like invitations, tied directly to its historical identity, like you said. Things like nature and history in harmony, or inviting tourists to experience the beautiful land of mountains and lakes.
Oh.
They're inviting you to feel the place, not necessarily build it more.
Exactly. And you can see this cultural split play out even in, the mundane details of daily life, especially cuisine.
Okay, food. How does that necessity of life in Pyongan, the mining, the tough farming, how does that dictate what ends up on the table?
Well, it's very much a cuisine of necessity, of resilience. South Pyongan's food reflects that rugged life. It relies heavily on hearty, high-carb foods, things like corn-based dishes, potatoes, stuff that fuels heavy labor. They also have their own versions of Pyeongseong-style cold noodles. It's similar to the famous Pyongyang naengmyeon, but often uses maybe a richer, beefier broth, which makes sense, right? Reflects the cold climate and the physical demands.
And what about their traditions? Are they tied to this too?
Seems so. Traditions often emphasize ancestor rituals, sure, but also seasonal harvest festivals, and specifically linked to rice and maize cultivation rituals tied directly to the success of the annual collective effort. It all seems to circle back to productivity, survival.
Okay. And Chungcheong. We have this idea of simplicity, patience.
Ah.
Does the food reflect that?
Yeah, Chungcheong cuisine is generally hearty but simple. It reflects its agricultural heartland status, but also that more moderate pace. Think about things like Cheongju bibimbap. It's a local version, often with more herbs, more local vegetables, or onbon, which is a warm rice soup. Comforting, not rushed, and their traditions really celebrate the ancient past. The biggest festival by far is the Bakji Cultural Festival, keeping that 1,500-year-old history alive and well.
Let's try and ground this with some landmarks. I mean, the landscape itself, the things people build or preserve, it tells a story about priorities.
Absolutely. In South Pyongyang, the defining sites are overwhelmingly industrial, operational. You've got the huge Jikdong coal mine, the Suncheon limestone mines, and of course, Pyeongseong, the science city. They're monuments built around extraction, labor, current needs. The focus feels very present, very near future.
And you contrast that with Cheongcheong. The focus shifts entirely, more towards artifacts, history, maybe spirituality.
Exactly. You've got the Independence Hall of Korea down in Shannon. That's a major site of national reflection looking back. You have the historic printing site of Jikji in Cheongju. That's the world's oldest surviving book, printed with movable metal type. I mean, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Cheongshang is defined not just by what it digs out of the ground, but by preserving and carefully crafting history. And then, yeah, you have the spiritual side. Mount Deorongsan is a famous spiritual hub, lots of temples, promoting meditation, reflection. Very different vibe.
Okay, so if we tie this all together,
Yeah.
maybe the final and perhaps most emotional differentiator is the music. Our notes describe the musical styles as giving us the clearest window into the region's emotional core.
Yeah, music often gets beyond the practical, doesn't it? Into the aspirational, the feeling. And the contrast here is really visceral. The Pyongan sound feels like a march, duty, grit. The Chungcheong sound is much slower, a kind of grounding reflection on the land and time.
Let's start with that Pyongan song, the one described in our notes. You said duty.
Hmm.
It's characterized as a coal mining work song,
Right.
blending dark blues with revolutionary march undertones. That sounds intense. And it mentions storytelling, acoustic, and gritty electric guitar, all supported by steady pounding drums. It almost sounds less like music and more like a rhythm for work.
That's a powerful way to put it. Those steady pounding drums, they could literally be setting the tempo for coordinated collective effort, right? And the themes are just as intense. Resilience and grit, collective duty, bittersweet nostalgia, moral weight. It's really the sound of the industrial laborer just surviving, pushing through. The lyric snippet we pulled out was ha yo, which translates roughly to, our life is a stone we will not break. It's just this assertion of unwavering collective strength in the face of, brutal physical hardship. It's forward-moving, demanding,
Right.
full of conviction.
And that forceful, driving energy just seems completely absent from the description of the Chungcheong song. This one's characterized as a slow, meditative erang.
Yes, exactly. So instead of those pounding drums, you get traditional instruments, like the gayajium, that's a zither, or the piri, a type of flute. And it even mentions incorporating rural sounds, maybe gentle hammered percussion, or even the distant sound of an anvil. It evokes the countryside, right? The sound of things being made slowly, carefully, not mass-produced.
And the themes are completely different. Nature and land, time and patience, legacy and history. Just sounds warm, communal, grounded.
It really does. And the sample lyric is designed to emphasize that relaxed pace, that acceptance of life's flow. It's meaning basically it's okay to go slowly. That characteristic young ending again. So one song is all about pushing forward, refusing to break. The other is about accepting the pace of the seasons, maybe. It's a profound difference in cultural expectation, I think.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for us? We've done this deep dive, looked at these two regions, both absolutely essential to their countries, but defined by these vastly different cultural rhythms. One clipped and driven by the mind, the factory. The other drawn out and patient, defined more by ancient fields and history.
And this brings us back to that really important question, that parallel we noticed earlier. What's truly fascinating here is how both regions, despite these opposing ideologies, different histories, completely different cultural tempos, both prioritize and celebrate this idea of the science city. Pyeongchang in the north, Daejeon in the south.
Yeah, that is striking. It suggests that this quest for scientific advancement, maybe it's a shared narrative underneath it all, whether it's focused on immediate industrial needs up north, or maybe more on fundamental research and linking it to historical preservation down south. Science is key for both.
It seems like that commitment to R&D, regardless of the political system, might be the ultimate expression of how a region sees its own future, its path forward. Grit or patience, science leads the way.
It's definitely something to think about. We encourage you, listening, to maybe consider how the language or the music or even the food in your own community reflects its foundational priorities. This kind of knowledge isn't just about, Korean geography or history. It's really about understanding those deep shaping cultural forces, whether it's industry or faith or just pace, that define any population anywhere. Thanks for diving deep with us today.